In 2024, the average per capita income of Teton County, Wyoming, hit $532,000, more than 6 times the national average, and nearly twice the figure for the second richest county in the country. That same year, the Teton County Library had to close on Sundays, not because the county ran out of money, because it ran out of workers. This is the story of a valley where the people who built the place can no longer afford to live in it, where restaurants shut down on their busiest nights because no one can staff them, where a single road over a mountain pass is the only thing connecting the town to the workforce that keeps it alive, and where that road, on a Saturday afternoon in June, simply collapsed. But to understand how a place gets to that point, you need to understand what made it valuable in the first place, and the irony at the center of all of it, that the same decision that saved Jackson Hole is the one that ultimately made it unlivable. The valley sits in northwestern Wyoming, a flat stretch of sagebrush and cottonwood roughly 60 miles long and 15 wide, walled in by mountains on nearly every side. To the west, the Teton Range rises without foothills. No gentle slope, no gradual introduction, just a sheer granite curtain punching nearly 7,000 feet straight up from the valley floor. It is, by almost any reckoning, the most dramatic mountain view in the lower 48. The Snake River runs through the middle of it. Elk winter there by the thousands. And for most of human history, almost nobody lived there year-round because the winters were brutal and the nearest supply line was days away. The name itself tells you what the early trappers thought of it. In mountain man parlance, a hole was a high-altitude valley enclosed by mountains, a place you dropped into and, with some effort, climbed back out of. David Edward Jackson, a fur trapper who worked the beaver streams there in the late 1820s, gave it his name almost by accident. His partner, William Sublette, simply started calling it Jackson's Hole on letters and maps, and the name stuck. Jackson trapped beaver there. He did not settle there. Nobody did, not for another 50 years. When the Wilson Cheney Company crossed Teton Pass on November 11, 1889, they found exactly 28 people in the entire valley. The company, families from a Mormon settlement in Utah fleeing drought, more than doubled the population overnight. They built the first school in 1892 in Sylvester Wilson's home. Nick Wilson, Sylvester's brother, opened the first hotel and post office at the base of Teton Pass in 1893. The town of Jackson was named in late 1893, incorporated in 1914, and by that point had a population of roughly 200. In 1920, the town elected an all-female city council, one of the first in the United States, including a female mayor. These women promptly increased the town treasury, improved the water system, cleaned the garbage off the streets, graded the roads, and beautified the cemetery. It was a town small enough that 5 determined women could fix everything wrong with it in a single term. To put that in perspective, Jackson was 30 years old before it had enough residents to fill a single city bus. The population numbers tell the story of the isolation. In 1888, 23 people lived in the valley. By 1900, it was 639, a boom by frontier standards driven by the Homestead Act, which granted 160-acre plots to qualified applicants for a fee of $10 to $15. By 1920, the count had risen to 1,381, and that included only those living legally on the land who participated in the census. The valley's economy, such as it was, ran on cattle. But cattle ranching in Jackson Hole was a brutal proposition. The growing season was short, the winters long, the hay crop marginal, and the nearest railroad, the connection to any real market, was over in Victor, Idaho, across that same Teton Pass. Getting cattle to market meant driving them over an 8,000-foot mountain pass, or finding some other way to haul them out of the hole. And so, as a saying went around the valley in those early years, it was easier to wrangle people than cattle. That observation turned out to be the most consequential economic insight in the valley's history. The first dude ranch in Jackson Hole, the J.Y., founded by Louis Joy in 1908, started small, housing 6 guests in its inaugural year. But the idea caught fire. In the 1920s, wealthy families from the East would take a train to Victor, Idaho, then ride a stagecoach over Teton Pass, and then get picked up in town by their dude ranch, which would bring them in by horse-drawn wagon. With that kind of time commitment for travel, guests stayed a minimum of a month. Most stayed the whole summer. They paid well. The JY charged $75 a week by the late 1920s, roughly $1,100 today, and lowered capacity to keep the experience exclusive. Other ranches sprang up along the base of the Tetons, the Bar BC, the Whitegrass, the Circle H, which charged $12 a day and housed 14 guests in 7 cabins. By the mid-1920s, dude ranching was the valley's largest employer. The population grew to around 1,350. Caretakers, hotel managers, engineers, game wardens, hardware store owners, telephone operators. A real town was forming. The valley got its first party line telephone. For the first time, a rancher could reach his neighbor without riding half a day. This was the Golden Age, and like all Golden Ages, it attracted the attention of people with far more money and far larger plans than anyone in the valley had imagined. In the summer of 1926, a man named Horace Albright, the superintendent of Yellowstone National Park, took a detour south to show a wealthy visitor the Teton Range and Jackson Hole. Albright had been quietly obsessed with the valley for over a decade. He had first seen it in 1915 and recognized immediately what he was looking at: one of the most spectacular landscapes in North America, sitting on unprotected land that was starting to attract gas stations, hot dog stands, and small subdivisions. The commercial clutter was creeping in. Albright wanted the valley preserved as an extension of the national park system, but the federal government didn't have the money to buy it. His wealthy visitor that summer was John D. Rockefeller, Jr. Rockefeller looked out across the valley floor to the Tetons and understood at once what Albright was showing him. The following year, 1927, Rockefeller created the Snake River Land Company, a front organization designed to purchase private land in Jackson Hole without anyone knowing who was behind it. The plan was simple and audacious: buy as much land as possible, as quietly as possible, and then donate it to the National Park Service for preservation. To prevent prices from being inflated by the presence of a Rockefeller fortune, the purchases had to remain secret. Robert Miller, a local cattleman, was hired to negotiate the deals on the ground. The year 1927 was a pivot point for Jackson Hole in ways beyond Rockefeller. President Coolidge issued executive orders withdrawing over 1,280 acres of public land from future homestead claims. The era of settling the valley by simply showing up and staking a parcel was ending. The Bureau of Public Roads completed a new highway from Jackson Lake to Meaner's Ferry and built a steel truss bridge. And, most dramatically, water breached the natural dam on the Gros Ventre River, sending a catastrophic flood through the valley, the worst in its recorded history. Everything was shifting at once: the infrastructure, the land rules, the river itself. Over the next several years, the Snake River Land Company acquired more than 35,000 acres for approximately $1.4 million. Rockefeller was buying the valley floor: the ranch land, the hay fields, the dude ranches, the stretches of riverbank and lakeshore that made the Tetons more than just a wall of rock. He was buying the foreground of the most famous mountain view in America. But rumors spread. By 1930, the company was forced to reveal Rockefeller's identity, and a furious backlash erupted. Ranchers who hadn't sold felt trapped. Cattlemen who depended on open range saw their future closing in. Members of Congress from Wyoming accused Rockefeller and the Park Service of a land grab. The controversy raged for more than 15 years. The Park Service initially refused to accept the donated land. It was too politically radioactive. Rockefeller, growing frustrated, threatened to sell it all on the open market if the government wouldn't take it. In 1943, President Roosevelt used an executive order to declare the donated land a national monument, bypassing Congress entirely. Wyoming's entire congressional delegation opposed it. A bill to abolish the monument passed both houses, but was vetoed by Roosevelt. Local ranchers staged a protest cattle drive across the newly designated monument land. The governor of Wyoming called it a dictatorial seizure. The fight finally ended in 1950 when Congress voted to fold the monument into an expanded Grand Teton National Park. The compromise included a provision unique in the national park system that allowed existing cattle grazing to continue. It was a peace offering to the ranchers, but by then the trajectory was set. The federal government now controlled the vast majority of the land in Teton County and would eventually control 97% of it. That number is worth sitting with for a moment. 97%. Of the roughly 2.7 million acres in Teton County, all but about 3% is federally or state-owned. Grand Teton National Park, Yellowstone, the Bridger Teton National Forest, the National Elk Refuge, all of it magnificent, all of it protected, and all of it, from a real estate standpoint, permanently off the market. The remaining 3%, roughly 77,000 acres, is the only private land that exists or will ever exist in the county. And of that, nearly a third has been placed under conservation easements by the Jackson Hole Land Trust, which means it can never be developed. What's left is a sliver, roughly 2% of the county's total land area, available for human habitation in one of the most beautiful and desirable locations on the planet. Rockefeller's act of conservation, the same act that preserved the Teton's foreground, that protected the elk migration corridors, that kept the gas stations and hot dog stands from lining the highway, also created the scarcity that would, decades later, make Jackson Hole the most expensive real estate market in America. The man who saved the valley from commercial ruin inadvertently set the conditions for a different kind of ruin entirely. But that wouldn't become apparent for a long time. Through the 1930s and 1940s, Jackson Hole remained remote, underpopulated, and by the federal government's own classification, economically depressed. The dude ranch era faded after World War II. Families who once spent entire summers at a ranch now had automobiles and interstate highways. They drove through instead of staying. The economy needed a new engine. Jackson had gotten its first taste of skiing in 1939 when Snow King, a small, steep hill right on the edge of town, opened as Wyoming's first ski area. Locals had been skiing in the valley for years. A man named Mike O'Neill was among the first to use 2 poles and make turns back in 1925, at a time when most skiers used a single pole jammed between their legs as a brake. Snow King was a locals' mountain, beloved and modest. In 1957, a 41-year-old retired advertising executive from San Francisco named Paul McCollister bought a 398-acre cattle ranch in the valley and settled in. McCollister had made his money young in radio advertising and spent a year skiing the famous resorts of Europe before coming to Wyoming. When a friend asked what he planned to do in Jackson Hole, McCollister said, "I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to play." He didn't stay idle for long. He became president of the Jackson Hole Ski Club, which operated out of Snow King, a small local hill that had opened in 1939. But McCollister had bigger ambitions. Flying over the valley one day with a friend, he looked across at Rendezvous Mountain and saw what the Europeans had, a mountain with over 4,000 feet of vertical drop, steeper and wilder than almost anything in the Alps. He decided to build a ski resort. It took years. McCollister and his partner Alex Morley, a general contractor from Cheyenne, formed the Jackson Hole Ski Corporation in 1963, secured a $1 million government-subsidized loan. They qualified because Teton County was classified as economically depressed, and started cutting runs in 1964. The resort opened for the 1965 to 66 winter season with 3 double chairlifts on Après-Vous Mountain. The following December, the original aerial tramway opened on Rendezvous Mountain, carrying 63 passengers at a time to the summit. Pepe Stiegler, the reigning Olympic gold medalist in slalom, was hired as ski school director. The mountain was spectacular and terrifying. Half the terrain was rated expert. The tram rose over 4,200 vertical feet, one of the greatest lifts in North America. McAllister marketed the place as a wild, serious mountain for serious skiers, a strategy that attracted devotees and repelled the casual resort crowd. For years, revenue was thin. At one point, McAllister resorted to selling lifetime passes and even personal furniture to keep the operation solvent. But the resort put Jackson Hole on the national map in a way that dude ranches and summer tourism never had. It made the valley a winter destination, and winter destinations attract a particular kind of wealth. People who can afford second homes, who travel for recreation, who think nothing of flying across the country for a long weekend. Then, in 1982, something happened that most Jackson residents probably didn't notice at the time, but that changed the valley's trajectory as profoundly as Rockefeller's land purchases had 55 years earlier. The Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City moved its annual Economic Policy Symposium to Jackson Lake Lodge inside Grand Teton National Park. The event had been running since 1978, held previously in Kansas City, then Vail and Denver, focused on agricultural economics. But in 1982, the Kansas City Fed invited Paul Volcker, then chairman of the Federal Reserve, to attend. The story goes that Volcker, an avid fly fisherman, accepted the invitation in part because of the fishing on the Snake River. From that year forward, the symposium stayed in Jackson Hole. Volcker came. Then Alan Greenspan came. Then Ben Bernanke, Janet Yellen, Jerome Powell. Central bankers from 40 countries, finance ministers, hedge fund managers, economists whose pronouncements moved trillions of dollars in global markets. Every August, for one weekend, the most powerful people in global finance gathered in a valley that most of them had never heard of 20 years earlier. They stayed at the Jackson Lake Lodge, a no-frills National Park Service facility with no spa, no exercise room, no salon. They hiked, they fished, they looked at the Tetons, and some of them thought, I could live here. The symposium didn't cause what happened next, but it introduced Jackson Hole to the one audience that would transform it. People whose net worth was measured not in millions, but in hundreds of millions and eventually billions, and who needed somewhere to put that money. Wyoming, as it happened, was ready for them. Here is what Wyoming offers that almost no other state can match. No state income tax, not reduced, not capped, constitutionally prohibited. No corporate tax, no estate tax, no inheritance tax. No tax on the sale of real estate, no tax on retirement income from out of state. And, this is the critical one, dynasty trusts that can run for up to 1,000 years. A dynasty trust allows wealthy families to transfer assets to future generations while minimizing estate and gift taxes, essentially allowing wealth to compound across centuries without the government taking its traditional cut at each generational transfer. Other states have favorable trust laws, South Dakota, Nevada, Delaware, but Wyoming combines the trust advantages with the tax advantages, with the scenery, with the privacy, with the cowboy mystique. Bloomberg Wealth Manager has repeatedly rated Wyoming the most tax-friendly state in the nation. The Tax Foundation has ranked it first in business tax climate. For a billionaire looking to establish residency, the calculus is straightforward. A family earning $50 million a year in a state like California or New York is paying state income taxes in the neighborhood of $5 to $6 million annually. Move to Wyoming, and that obligation drops to zero. A single family's annual tax savings can exceed the median home price in most American cities. And in Jackson Hole, that savings comes with a view of the Tetons, world-class skiing, 2 national parks, and the social cachet of a town that hosts the Federal Reserve. The results, measured in dollars, are staggering. John Mars, whose fortune derives from the candy and pet food empire, lives in Jackson. His net worth is estimated at $46 billion. Christy Walton, heir to the Walmart fortune, lives in Jackson, $24 billion. J. Joe Ricketts, founder of TD Ameritrade, lives just outside town, $8 billion. Hans-Jörg Wyss, the Swiss-born medical device billionaire, lives in Wilson, a few miles west, nearly $5 billion. These are not seasonal visitors. They are residents, and their income flows through Teton County's per capita calculations like a river flooding a rain gauge. Despite having just 4% of Wyoming's population, Teton County residents earned 23% of the state's total personal income in 2023, and essentially half of its total investment income. 77% of residents' income comes not from wages, but from investments, dividends, capital gains, rents. The national average is 18%. The numbers produce a statistical vertigo. The average per capita income is over $500,000. The median household income is around $120,000, which means half the households earn less than that, and a very small number earn so much more that they drag the average into the stratosphere. The top 1% of households have an estimated average annual income of $35 million, which is 221 times what the bottom 99% makes. For context, the gap between the wealthiest and poorest county in America, Teton County, Wyoming, and Wheeler County, Georgia, is roughly $500,000 per person. The housing market reflects this mathematics with brutal clarity. The average single-family home price in Teton County has pushed past $7 million. In early 2024, 56 homes were on the market in Jackson. Only 3 were listed under $2 million. The most expensive home in Wyoming, a luxury ranch in the Kelly area of Greater Jackson Hole, was listed at $65 million. A 2-bedroom apartment rents for an average of $3,354 a month, not including utilities, in a county where the cost of housing is 2.5 times the state average. The town's one full-service RV campground was purchased by the municipality itself for $28 million, 5 acres. And here is where the arithmetic of exclusion becomes an arithmetic of dysfunction. A ski resort needs lift operators. A restaurant needs line cooks. A hospital needs nurses. A school needs teachers. A library needs librarians. These are people who earn $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year. The median home price is 19 times the median income. There is no version of that math that works. So the workers leave. Or rather, they never arrive, and the ones who are already there get pushed further and further out. First to the edges of Jackson, then to the small towns south, in Star Valley, and increasingly over the mountains entirely to Victor and Driggs in Teton County, Idaho, where the median home price is around $500,000. Expensive for Idaho, but at least within shouting distance of what a working person might aspire to. The road that connects these Idaho towns to Jackson is Highway 22, which crosses Teton Pass at 8,431 feet. In good conditions, the 24-mile drive from Victor to Jackson takes about 35 minutes. Every day, roughly 3,400 Idaho residents make this drive to get to their jobs in Jackson. They are nurses, teachers, police officers, waiters, cooks, motel housekeepers, construction workers, landscapers, fishing guides, mountain guides, and salespeople. A 2022 regional housing study estimated that 61% of Teton County's roughly 25,000 workers live outside the county. These workers collectively drive about 75 million vehicle miles per year just commuting, and each household spends between $6,000 and $10,000 annually on the commute alone. Between 2011 and 2021, eastbound traffic on Teton Pass increased by 70%. The pass is steep, narrow, winding, and avalanche-prone. There is an Instagram page called Teton Pass Holes, dedicated to documenting reckless driving on it. Truckers ignore the winter trailer ban. Tourists in oversized RVs white-knuckle the switchbacks. Locals have a love-hate relationship with the road. They snarl about it, complain about it, and drive it every day because it's the only thing connecting affordable housing to the jobs that pay the bills. On June 8, 2024, a section of that road collapsed. It didn't crack or buckle or develop a pothole. A portion of Highway 22 failed catastrophically. The earth beneath it gave way, and the road surface collapsed into an impassable cliff of rubble. The failure made national news. Overnight, the 35-minute commute became an 85-mile detour through Swan Valley, Idaho, and Alpine, Wyoming, adding roughly 2 hours each way to the daily drive. An economist on the Jackson Town Council estimated the closure was costing the local economy $600,000 a day. Using IRS mileage reimbursement rates, each driver's daily cost jumped to $88. With a mean hourly wage in Jackson of $40, a worker had to put in more than 2 extra hours just to cover the cost of getting to work. The collapse did not create Jackson Hole's crisis, it revealed it. The town had built its entire economic model on the assumption that workers would absorb the cost, in money, in time, in danger, of living somewhere they could afford and commuting to somewhere they couldn't. As long as the road held, the arrangement was invisible. When the road broke, the town broke with it. Even before the collapse, the dysfunction was everywhere. The COVID-19 pandemic paradoxically made everything worse. As a drive-to destination where the main attraction was the outdoors, Jackson Hole became a magnet for Americans who couldn't travel abroad and wanted wide-open spaces. Remote workers, the kind who earn coastal tech salaries but can live anywhere with an internet connection, discovered they could work from a ranch house with a view of the Grand Teton. Home prices, already extreme, doubled in 3 years. The pandemic didn't just bring tourists. It brought new residents whose income didn't depend on the local economy at all. People who could outbid any local for any property without thinking twice. In the summer of 2021, Jackson experienced what tourism officials called the busiest period in its history. Cell phone data showed 50,000 visitors in the town every day in July, roughly 5 for every resident, a 50% daily increase over any previous year on record. The parks were mobbed, the restaurants were packed, and the restaurants were closing early because they couldn't find staff. Local, a popular downtown restaurant, shut down on Saturdays. Trio closed on Saturdays. Café Geneviève stopped serving dinner. Cowboy Coffee considered cutting operations. The Teton County Library closed on Sundays. The Recreation Center limited its hours. A Chamber of Commerce survey found that over 50% of member businesses were considering operational changes due to staffing shortages. 32% planned to reduce hours, 19% were adjusting their product, and 5% were considering closing entirely. In the other category, a common answer, leaving Teton County altogether. One resident put it this way: "You've got to ask yourself, is it worth living in a place where you can't even get ice cream with your kids?" He had tried to take his son for ice cream on a Tuesday afternoon. One shop was closed for lack of staff. The line at the other was over an hour long. This is the paradox that the title of this documentary points to, and it is more layered than it first appears. It is not that nobody wants to visit Jackson Hole. 4 million people a year still come. The national parks still draw crowds. The ski mountain still operates. The town square, with its 4 arches made of elk antlers, each containing up to 12,000 pounds of naturally shed antlers stacked onto steel frames, rebuilt every 40 to 50 years by the local Rotary Club since 1953, still attracts a steady stream of tourists posing for photographs. The antler arches are among the most recognizable landmarks in the American West. But something has shifted in the experience of visiting. The average daily hotel rate in December 2025 was projected at over $800 a night. A motel room that costs $125 in November goes for $1,000 in July. A resident tourism sentiment survey found that only 26% of Jackson's own residents believe tourism's benefits outweigh its drawbacks. 53% said there are no non-economic benefits to tourism at all. The two most popular suggestions from residents were blunt: stop advertising Jackson Hole and limit the number of visitors. The Travel and Tourism Board, the same organization originally tasked with promoting the town, is now charged with figuring out how to manage the consequences of its own success. A former executive director of the Jackson Hole Chamber of Commerce reflected on the transformation with something like disbelief. It's hard to believe there was an era when people like myself were actually trying to attract more people to Northwest Wyoming. For the ordinary American tourist, the family driving from Denver or Salt Lake, the retired couple who visited Yellowstone decades ago and wanted to come back, Jackson Hole has become a place where they feel, however subtly, that they don't quite belong. The practical barriers alone are formidable. You should book your hotel a year out in summer. Dinner reservations need to be made at least a month in advance. Parking for anything larger than a compact car may, in peak season, require driving to another town. A town infrastructure designed for 10,000 residents hosts 10 times that every day for 4 straight months. The town square still has its wooden boardwalks, maintained to evoke the Old West, but the shops behind them sell $4,000 cowboy hats with diamond bands. The restaurant, where you need a reservation a month in advance, serves a clientele that arrived by private jet. The Jackson Hole Airport is one of the busiest private aviation hubs in the country, the only commercial airport located inside a national park, and the one where the Gulf Streams line up on the tarmac like cars in a suburban driveway. The fundamental transaction of tourism, I pay money, I get an experience, starts to feel wrong when the gap between you and the place you're visiting becomes too wide. It's one thing to visit a luxury destination and know you're splurging. It's another to visit a town where the people who pour your coffee live 85 miles away over a mountain pass that periodically collapses, where the library can't stay open, where a cup of coffee generates more state and local tax revenue than the purchase of a multi-million-dollar home, because Wyoming has no real estate transfer tax. It's not guilt, exactly. It's more a vague sense that the place has been optimized for someone else, and you are there on sufferance. In March 2026, the New York Times published a lengthy investigation under the headline, "Welcome to Wyoming, the frontier of America's new Gilded Age." The piece described Teton County as not merely the richest county in the country, but a window into America's near future as the country enters a new Gilded Age, one in which millionaires are turning into billionaires overnight. The article noted that the disparity had escalated sharply since 2017, that the average single-family home price had pushed past $7 million, and that the result was a critical housing shortage for anyone who is not wealthy and a strain on local services as tax cuts favored by the rich cut into local government revenues. The reaction in Jackson was complicated. Some residents bristled. A local columnist wrote that the Times had misrepresented the community, that most people there earn modest incomes, that the billionaire narrative was a caricature, that neighbors raised their kids in trailer parks and drove school buses. The median household income is $118,000, meaning half the county earns less. Simply put, we are not all billionaires, he wrote. In fact, only a few people are. And that is precisely the point. The few have become so wealthy, and the mechanisms that brought them there, the tax laws, the trust structures, the scarcity of land, are so powerful that they have reshaped the entire community around themselves, even as the majority of residents live lives that look nothing like the average suggests. Jonathan Schechter, a Jackson Town Council member and economist who tracks the county's wealth data, put his finger on the structural irony. A cup of coffee costing $1 generates more state and local tax revenue than the purchase of a multi-million-dollar home. Wyoming's tax structure was built for an economy of ranchers, oil workers, and small-town retailers. It was never designed to accommodate a county where the average home costs over $5 million and the primary source of income is investment returns. The system doesn't capture wealth, it attracts it. The deeper irony is one that runs through the entire history of this valley. Every force that made Jackson Hole desirable also made it less accessible. The national parks that protect the scenery also lock up 97% of the land. The ski resort that put the town on the map also attracted the wealthy second home buyers who drove up prices. The Federal Reserve Symposium that made the valley famous among the global financial elite also made it a destination for the kind of money that can reshape a community in a generation. The tax laws that bring billionaires to Wyoming also starve local government of the revenue it needs to build affordable housing, staff its library, and keep its recreation center open on weekends. In the conservation ethic, the genuine century-old commitment to protecting wild land that stretches back through the Rockefellers, through Horace Albright, through the dude ranchers who first saw what was worth saving, is itself part of the trap. Every acre placed under conservation easement is an acre that can never house a worker. Every ranch preserved as open space is a ranch that will never be subdivided into starter homes. The choice between conservation and community was never supposed to be a choice at all. But in a county where only 2% of the land is available for development, and where the remaining 2% is being bid on by people with $46 billion fortunes, the math leaves no room for compromise. There is a road in Victor, Idaho, where you can stand and look east toward Teton Pass. From there, the mountains look the same as they looked in 1889, when the Wilson Cheney Company crossed them with wagons and children and the trappings of a civilization they intended to build. The pass is still steep, still narrow, still dangerous. In the summer of 2025, a runaway truck on the pass killed 2 people and seriously injured several others. Nearly 200 residents packed the old Wilson schoolhouse demanding immediate safety improvements. Studies had been commissioned for decades. Action had not followed. The road handles more traffic than it was ever designed for because it is the only affordable link between a town that needs workers and the workers who need a town. Meanwhile, in Jackson, the town square is still there. The wooden boardwalks are maintained. The staged gunfight still goes off at 6:15 every evening except Sundays. The stagecoach, pulled by enormous Clydesdales, still circles the downtown blocks. And the 4 antler arches, rebuilt most recently between 2007 and 2015, each one containing roughly 2,000 antlers collected by Boy Scouts from the National Elk Refuge each spring, still stand at the corners of the square, framing the same view of the same sky over the same boardwalks where, 100 years ago, the whole valley could gather and know every face. The antlers are real. They are shed naturally every spring by elk that have wintered in the refuge since 1912. The arches decompose over decades, bone returns to bone, and are rebuilt by volunteers. They weigh 12,000 pounds apiece and cost nothing but labor and time. They are among the last things in Jackson Hole that cannot be bought.